So we've got the start of our annual holy days coming up pretty soon. It's starting with the Passover service, which is on the evening of the 31st of March. It's not actually a holy day. It's a commemoration of Christ's sacrifice. And I say our holy days, referring to us as an organization, United Church of God, but that's technically not correct. Where they're listed in Leviticus 23, if you want to go and read where they're all listed there in Leviticus 23, it clearly says these are the feasts of the Lord. And interestingly enough, it starts with the weekly Sabbath is the first one listed. But these are the feasts of the Lord. They're not the feast of the Jews. They're not the feast of the Israelites, the feasts of the Lord. And we firmly believe they're there for us to still observe, and for a number of reasons. The biggest reason is Jesus himself observed these days. When he sat down with his disciples for their last meal, when he instituted the symbols of the new covenant that we read about in the gospel accounts, the bread and the wine, he was doing so in obedience to this instruction. And if you read the book of Acts, is a history of the early church. If you just read it for what it is, without any bias, you can't come to any other conclusion than that these days were being observed by the early church. In fact, Paul himself, in his first letter to the Corinthian church, the Corinthians they didn't have a history of holy day keeping. But he's in this letter, he's referring to one of the holy day seasons, the days of unleavened bread. And he literally says, therefore, let us keep the feast. And leading up to this statement, he talks about the concept of leaven and unleaven, which is the whole theme of these days which follow the Passover. It's the days of unleavened bread. He doesn't elaborate on the meaning, and considering he's talking to an audience without a history of observing these days, one can only conclude that they knew what he was talking about because they were observing them. His admonition is to keep doing it, but with a new attitude, with a new approach. Another reason is there are profound spiritual lessons to be learned by observing these days, lessons which we can only really appreciate when we actually do observe them. They also point to what God is doing, what his plan is for his creation, the very reason we exist in the first place. Colossians, if you make a note of Colossians chapter 2, verse 17, it refers to them as a shadow of things to come. And we can only fully understand and fully appreciate God's plan, his purpose, when we observe these days. So if you're not familiar with these days, or maybe you believe they're not there for us to keep anymore, they're no longer necessary to keep, look into them with an open heart to God's instruction.